My ex-wife coldly told me our son's death was my personal problem, while she lived in luxury. I begged everyone for help, only to be met with cold shoulders. That was until a hospital janitor quietly handed me a $215,000 check and whispered 4 words that changed everything. "Your son is dying, and we need $215,000 for the surgery," Dr. Harmon said, his voice cutting through the sterile hospital air like a jagged blade. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly pallor over everything in the room, but nothing was as cold as the realization that my world was collapsing. My name is Caleb Miller. I'm 42, a construction foreman in Philadelphia who has spent 20 years building structures meant to last for centuries. But as I stood there, I realized I couldn't build a way to save the only thing that mattered, my 11-year-old son, Leo. Leo was the kind of kid who lived for Friday night lights and the smell of fresh-cut grass on a football field. He was the heart of his middle school team, a small but fierce quarterback with a laugh that could brighten the grayest Philly morning. Now he was buried under white sheets 3 floors up his heart, failing him at an age when his only worry should have been making the playoffs. How long?" I managed to ask, my throat feeling like it was lined with broken glass. 6 weeks at most," Dr. Harmon replied, adjusting his glasses. "The deterioration is accelerating. There's a specialist at Penn Medicine, Dr. Chen, who has an incredible success rate with this procedure, but insurance has classified it as experimental. They won't cover a dime." I walked out to the parking lot, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold my phone. I called the one person who should have shared this burden with me. Sloan picked up on the 3rd ring, her voice coated in that polished, distant tone she'd adopted ever since she married Sterling Vaughn and moved into a gated estate in the main line. "Caleb, I'm right in the middle of a charity auction committee meeting. Can this be brief?" She sighed. "It's Leo Sloan. The doctor said he needs surgery immediately or he won't make it to summer. It costs $215,000. There was a silence on the other end, punctuated only by the faint clinking of crystal glasses in the background. Caleb, you always did have a flair for the dramatic," she finally said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Sterling and I have our own commitments. We just pledged a massive donation to the museum, and the twins' equestrian lessons are... Look, you fought for primary custody. You told the judge you were the more stable parent. This is your responsibility now. It's your problem, Caleb. Figure it out." The line went dead before I could even scream. The following days were a blur of humiliation. I called my brother, who was already working double shifts at the warehouse just to keep his own lights on. I called my aging mother, who offered me her meager $3,000 life savings while sobbing into the receiver. I stood outside Lincoln Financial Field during a game with a cardboard sign and Leo's picture. People looked through me as if I were a ghost. A teenager took a selfie with me in the background, laughing at the beggar, while a businessman dropped a single nickel into my cup without looking up. After 2 weeks of begging every soul I knew and launching a GoFundMe that barely cracked $4,000, I was at rock bottom. I was a man who built cities, yet I was powerless to keep a single heart beating. By the 3rd week, the desperation had turned into a hollow, aching silence. I spent my nights in the hospital listening to the rhythmic, mechanical chirp of Leo's heart monitor, a sound that reminded me with every beat that time was a currency I didn't have. My son, once a blur of motion on the football field, was now a shadow. His skin had taken on a translucent grayish hue, and his grip, once strong enough to throw a 30-yard spiral, was now weak and cold. "Dad," he whispered one night, his eyes fluttered open, tracking the muted highlights of a game on the TV. "Am I going to miss the season opener?" I tucked the blanket tighter around his thin frame, forcing a smile that felt like it was tearing my face apart. "The team is waiting for their captain Leo. You just focus on getting stronger." He looked at me, and for a second I saw the clarity of a child who knew too much. He didn't ask again. Desperate for air, I wandered out of the room and found myself in the hospital's small, dimly lit chapel, It was 2:00 a.m. I sank into a wooden pew, the smell of floor wax and old hymnals wrapping around me. I hadn't prayed in years, but I fell to my knees anyway. I offered deals to a God I wasn't sure was listening. Take my life, take my limbs, take every house I'd ever build, just leave me the boy. The heavy oak door creaked open behind me. I didn't turn around expecting a nurse or perhaps another grieving soul. Instead, I heard the slow rhythmic squeak of a mop bucket. A man in a faded blue uniform with the name Artie stitched in yellow thread over his heart shuffled in. He didn't say anything at first. He just moved his mop in steady hypnotic arcs across the linoleum, his back slightly hunched from decades of labor. He eventually stopped near my pew, leaning on the handle of his mop. "Hard to find the right words in here sometimes, isn't it?" He said, his voice as gravelly as a Pennsylvania coal mine. I wiped my face, embarrassed to be seen broken. "Words don't pay for heart surgeries," I muttered. Artie sat down at the end of the pew, keeping a respectful distance. "No, they don't. But sometimes they open doors you didn't know were there." He looked at the cross on the wall with eyes that seemed to hold a century of stories. "I've seen you here every night, Caleb, and I've seen the boy. He's a fighter. Reminds me of my own 30 years ago." I looked at him, really looked at him. He was just a janitor, a man the hospital staff walked past without a glance. He looked like a man who lived on coffee and Social Security, but there was a stillness about him that was unnerving. "The doctors told me it's over if I don't get the money by Friday," I said, the words spilling out because I had no one else to tell. "And I'm $200,000 short. I failed him." Artie reached into the pocket of his sallow uniform and pulled out a small tattered leather book. It looked like an old ledger. He didn't hesitate. He pulled a pen from behind his ear and wrote with a steady hand. When he tore the slip of paper out and handed it to me, I didn't even want to take it. I thought it was a prayer or a phone number for a local charity. I looked down. My heart stopped. It was a check. The number was written in neat, old-fashioned cursive, $215,000. "This isn't funny," I snapped, my voice cracking. "I'm losing my son. I don't have time for a cruel joke." "It's no joke, Caleb," Artie said softly, rising to his feet. "Check the routing number. Call the bank at dawn. It's all there." "How?" I gasped, clutching the paper like it was a lifeline. You work the night shift. You mop floors." Artie looked at his mop bucket and then back at me. "I do, because the floors need cleaning, and I need to be where the fight is. But before I was Artie the janitor, I was someone else. And that money, it's been sitting in the dark for a long time waiting for a reason to see the light." I stared at the signature Arthur Jenkins. It was then that the first twist hit me. The bank's fraud department didn't just flag the check, they called the police. 2 hours later, I was in a small security office accused of predatory scamming against an elderly employee. I begged them to talk to Artie, but the hospital administration claimed they had no record of an Arthur Jenkins ever owning that kind of wealth. I was sitting there, handcuffed to a chair, watching the sun rise on the day Leo was supposed to die, realizing that the miracle I thought I held was about to become the reason I ended up in a cell. The heavy door of the security office swung open, and for a moment I thought I was seeing a ghost. It wasn't just Artie. Standing beside him was a man in a charcoal suit worth more than my truck, carrying a briefcase that looked like it belonged in a federal court. The hospital's chief of surgery and the head of finance followed behind them, looking like they had just seen a vision. "Release him," the lawyer said, his voice cold and commanding. "Now." The security guard fumbled with the keys, his face turning a deep shade of crimson as the handcuffs clicked open. I collapsed back into the chair, my mind spinning. Artie stepped forward, no longer looking like a tired old man. He stood tall, his presence filling the room. "Mr. Miller, I apologize for the delay," the lawyer said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I represent the Jenkins estate. It seems the hospital's records were incomplete. They knew Arthur as the man who mops the OR, but they forgot he is the same Arthur Jenkins who holds the primary patents for the very cardiac monitors they use in every room of this building." I looked at Artie, my mouth agape. "The medical device patent. You're that Arthur Jenkins." Artie gave a small, sad smile. "I didn't want the name on the wall, Caleb. I just wanted to be close to the work. When I sold my company 20 years ago, I kept enough to ensure no child in this city would have to wait for a miracle because of a decimal point. But the hospital board, they have a way of forgetting where their technology comes from when they're looking at a balance sheet." But as the hospital staff began frantically prepping for Leo's surgery, the second twist began to unravel like a dark thread. Marcus Thorne pulled me aside, his expression darkening. "There's something you need to know about why that surgery was denied in the first place, Caleb. It wasn't just the insurance company. The experimental classification was pushed by the pharmaceutical board that controls the distribution of the specialized valve Leo needs." He handed me a document. At the top of the board's directory was a name that made the blood in my veins turn to ice: Sterling Vaughn. Sloane's new husband wasn't just a wealthy investor. He was the man who had personally signed the memorandum to inflate the price of the life-saving components and lobby insurance companies to stop covering them all to protect his firm's profit margins. My son was dying because the man sleeping in my ex-wife's bed had decided a child's life wasn't worth the cost of a luxury yacht. I felt a roar of fury building in my chest, but Artie placed a weathered hand on my arm. "Don't let the fire burn the house down, son," he whispered. "We use their greed to feed the cure. Sterling Vaughn's company is about to find out that I still own the underlying licensing rights to his most profitable monitor. If he wants to keep his company, he's going to have to make this right for Leo and for every other kid on that floor." The 4 words Artie had whispered in the chapel weren't just a comfort, they were a revelation of a hidden war. He hadn't just given me a check, he had handed me a weapon. As Sloane and Sterling pulled up to the hospital entrance in their sleek black sedan, summoned by the legal firestorm Marcus had ignited, they didn't see a janitor. They saw the man who held their entire empire in his calloused, soapy hands. Artie walked right past Sloane, who was gaping at him in shock, and looked Sterling straight in the eye. "The boy is going into surgery now," Artie said, his voice echoing in the marble lobby. "And you're going to sit in that waiting room and pray he makes it. Because if his heart stops, your legacy ends with it." The surgical doors swung shut, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in the waiting room. Sloane sat on the edge of a designer chair, her face a mask of pale foundation and hidden terror. Sterling paced near the window, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking nervously against the tile, a sharp contrast to the slow measured shuffle of Artie, who had returned to his post, quietly mopping the far corner of the hallway. "Caleb, I didn't know," Sloane stammered, reaching out a hand toward me. "You didn't know because you didn't care to ask," I replied, not even looking at her. "You were too busy counting the chandeliers in your summer house to notice your son's heart was stopping." The hours stretched like years. Every time the red in-surgery light flickered, my heart skipped a beat. Sterling tried to take a business call, but Artie stopped his mop right in front of him. The old man didn't say a word. He just stared at Sterling with eyes that saw through the millions of dollars and the corporate titles down to the hollow core of the man. Sterling slowly put his phone away and sat down defeated. Finally, at 6:00 a.m., Dr. Harmon emerged. He was exhausted, his surgical cap tucked into his pocket, but a small smile played on his lips. "He's stable. The new valve is holding. Leo's heart is pumping on its own for the first time in months." I collapsed into a chair, the air finally returning to my lungs. Sloane let out a sob, but when she moved toward the recovery wing, a nurse stepped in her way. "Only the primary guardian, for now, Mrs. Vaughn. Caleb, you can see him." I walked into the recovery room. Leo looked so small amidst the forest of tubes and wires, but the grayish tint was gone. His cheeks held a faint, beautiful pink hue. His eyes fluttered open, drowsy from the anesthesia. He saw me, and then his gaze drifted to the doorway where Artie stood still, holding his mop, watching from the shadows. "Dad," Leo whispered, his voice a ghost of a sound. "Is that the angel? That's Artie's son. He's the one who held the line." 5 years have passed since that morning. Today, I stood on the sidelines of the city championship game. Leo, now 16 and 6'2", took. The snap dropped back and fired a perfect 40-yard touchdown pass that lit up the scoreboard. The crowd went wild, but my eyes stayed on the front row of the bleachers. There sat Artie. He doesn't mop floors anymore. He's the chairman of a foundation that has eliminated medical debt for over 3,000 families in Philadelphia. He still wears his old work jacket, the one with Artie stitched over the heart. Beside him sat my mother and my brother, whose warehouse mortgage was quietly paid off by an anonymous donor 3 years ago. Sloan and Sterling are gone from our lives. After the legal battle, Artie's lawyers waged Sterling's company was forced into a massive settlement that funded the very pediatric wing where Leo was saved. They lost the mansion, the mainline status, and the twins' equestrian lessons. Last I heard, Sterling was working as a junior consultant and Sloan was trying to reinvent herself, but Leo never received a single letter from them that didn't ask for something in return. Every Saturday, Leo and I go back to that same old diner. We order the blueberry pancakes and the crispy bacon, but we always order a third plate to go. We drive down to the hospital and Leo walks into the chapel, the place where a janitor once changed the world. He leaves the food for whichever desperate parent is kneeling there, praying for a miracle they can't afford. Framed in our hallway at home isn't the check for $215,000. Instead, it's a simple piece of paper Artie gave Leo on the day he was discharged. It's a drawing of a football signed by a man who taught me that the most powerful people aren't the ones who build skyscrapers, but the ones who keep the light on for those lost in the dark. I still think about those 4 words Artie whispered when I was at my lowest. They weren't just about money or medicine. They were a reminder of a truth that Sterling Vaughn and Sloan could never understand. As Artie leaned in that night, his breath smelling of peppermint and old age, he had looked at my broken soul and said, "Love never goes bankrupt." Today, Leo is a healthy 16-year-old who leads his varsity football team with a heart that beats stronger than ever. But the impact of Artie's miracle didn't stop at the hospital exit. It transformed our entire city. After the surgery, the legal storm Artie's team unleashed forced a massive restructuring of the medical board. Sterling Vaughn was ousted in a public scandal, his predatory pricing exposed on the front page of every major newspaper. Sloan's life of luxury crumbled along with his reputation. The mansion was sold, and the friends she'd fought so hard to impress vanished the moment the money did. Artie finally hung up his mop, but he didn't disappear into a life of leisure. He used the rest of his fortune to establish the Timothy Jenkins Grace Fund, a foundation that has since cleared the medical debt of over 5,000 families across the country. He moved into a small house just 3 blocks away from us where he spends his Sunday afternoons teaching Leo how to restore vintage watches, a craft that requires the same patience and precision he used to build the world's most advanced heart monitors. Every year, on the anniversary of the surgery, we return to that hospital chapel. We don't go to mourn, but to remember. The hospital eventually tried to name a wing after Artie, but he refused. He told them the only monument he wanted was for the floors to stay clean and the doors to stay open for anyone, regardless of the balance in their bank account. The $215,000 check hangs in a simple wooden frame in our living room. It's not there to remind us of the money, but of the grace that found us when we were invisible to the rest of the world. It reminds us that miracles don't always fall from the sky in bursts of light. Sometimes they arrive at 2:00 a.m., pushing a squeaky yellow bucket wearing a faded blue uniform with a name tag that says Artie. I've learned that the true measure of a man isn't the height of the buildings he builds or the zeros in his investment portfolio. It's the depth of the shadow he's willing to stand in so that someone else can step into the sun. As Leo walked across the stage to accept his Scholar Athlete Award last month, I saw Artie in the front row wiping his glasses and smiling. I realized then that Artie didn't just save my son's life, he gave me a soul worth keeping. If you ever find yourself in a dark place feeling like the world has turned its back on you, Remember the janitor in Philadelphia. Keep your eyes open for the quiet ones, the ones who do the work no one else wants to do. Because in the end, love is the only currency that never loses its value. And as long as there are people like Artie in the world, hope will never go bankrupt. Gemini Danoi. The legacy of that night in the chapel continues to ripple through our lives in ways I never expected. My ex-wife Sloane reached out recently, not with an apology, but with a request for a loan after Sterling's final appeal was denied. I didn't feel anger, only a profound sense of pity. I told her that if she was truly in need, she should apply to the Jenkins Foundation just like everyone else. She never called back. Leo graduated at the top of his class this year. On his graduation cap, he didn't put a sports logo or a clever quote. He taped a small silver penny from 1943, a steel penny. He told me it was a reminder that even when things look like common scrap, they can be priceless if you know what you're looking at. He sees heading to Penn Medicine next fall, the same hospital that saved him. He wants to be a pediatric surgeon, but he told Artie he plans to work the night shift as a volunteer orderly first. He wants to make sure he never forgets the view from the hallway. Artie is slower now, his joints finally giving in to the years of physical labor, but his mind is as sharp as a diamond. We still spend our Friday nights on the porch watching the sunset over the Philly skyline. Sometimes he gets quiet looking at his hands that invented the future, and then spent a decade mopping up the past. "You know, Caleb," he said to me last week, "I used to think Timothy was the one who was lost. But standing in that chapel that night, I realized I was the one who was lost. Your boy didn't just get a heart that night. He gave me mine back." As the screen fades to black, I want you to look around your own life. We often look toward the penthouses and the pedestals for our heroes, but we walk right past the giants who are cleaning our windows and emptying our trash. The world is full of Artie's people who have turned their grief into a lighthouse. If this story moved, you don't just leave a like. Take a moment today to look at the invisible people in your life. Say thank you to the janitor, the bus driver, the person stocking the shelves. You never know whose miracle is currently hidden under a work uniform, waiting for a reason to be revealed. Because, as I've learned from a man with a mop and a heart of gold, the most beautiful structures aren't built of steel and stone. They are built of the moments when we choose to catch someone who is falling, even when we have every excuse to keep walking. Leo is living proof that hope isn't a fairy tale, it's a choice we make for each other. And that is the most powerful medicine there is.